and was recently part of the core teams responsible for the new agenda for peace 2022-2023 and the system-wide UN COVID vaccination program 2020-2021. Before joining the Department of Peacekeeping Operations, Mr. Ulich worked in the Executive Office of the Secretary General, where he managed the Policy Committee of the Secretary General, a cabinet-style decision-making mechanism. Mr. Ulich has also worked for United Nations Mission in Sudan and for the Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, where he was a desk officer and a team leader for Afghanistan, Iraq, and Sudan. He was an adjunct professor at the School of International and Public Affairs at Columbia University. Before joining the United Nations, Mr. Ulich worked as an attorney for major international law firms in New York, Hong Kong, and London. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Ulich to the podium.
Thank you so much, General, and good afternoon. Welcome back to the second session. Always a bit thankless to speak right after lunch, but hopefully we'll keep it interesting enough for everybody. I want to start by thanking the opening speakers at the first panel. They really did an outstanding job in terms of setting the context, the very difficult and challenging context against which all of our missions are operating at the moment. And they talked very much at the strategic, political level about the many difficulties we confront. This panel will drop down a bit to the operational level, where the vast majority of our colleagues on the ground implement protection of civilians mandates in the largest missions that are currently deployed. Protection of civilians, of course, is only one of several protection mandates. We have child protection mandates, we have human rights mandates, and mandates related to conflict-related sexual violence. Thankfully, I don't have to say very much about POC as a mandate and what it entails, because our ASG this morning laid out some of the main points, which I will only allude to very briefly now. It's an all-of-mission effort that requires a tremendous amount of integration, coordination across different mission components, but also with different protection actors. The military and police components play critical roles, and of course they're the main focus of our discussions today. Martha Pobi also talked about some of the key capabilities that are required for effective implementation of POC mandates, the importance of community engagement, engagement teams, effective and integrated patrolling, which I know our panelists will talk about in this discussion. And she also talked about briefly the data-driven help you concretize and target your pledges even further than I'm sure you've already been doing, guided by all the documents that we've put out, but also by the discussions today. We have a really outstanding panel to help you think about all that from a field and operational perspective and civil society perspective. We have someone who is currently leading a large military component in one of our missions. We have someone who recently spent a lot of time traveling into the deep field looking at units that are deployed. We have someone who's in charge of overseeing all of the deployments of one of our leading TCCs, including pre-deployment, what lessons can be learned. And we have someone from one of our most important partners in civil society working with us on protection of civilians, civilian harm mitigation, etc. And I've asked them to look specifically at what member states can provide as part of their remarks and pledge. And I think maybe borrowing the metaphor that David used this morning, also looking at it from the top down to the very bottom, where at the very bottom, if you will, we have the all-important engagement with the communities, the effective patrolling that is done through mixed engagement teams, the political engagement as well that our military and police colleagues conduct at really the deep field level. And then we have at the top a desperate need for air assets, more mobility, UAVs, et cetera, and of course in the Force HQs a need for very specific expertise, whether it's on strategic communications or on intelligence, peacekeeping intelligence, or planning, or other areas. We'll hear more about all of that from our 4 panelists, which are waiting eagerly to join me here on the podium. I'll start with Lieutenant General Mohan Subramanian, who is the Force Commander of UNMISS, a position he's held since July 2022. He's an alumnus of the National Defense Academy and the Indian Military Academy, and was commissioned into India's Army in June 1986. Before he became Force Commander, he had a very distinguished military career with the Indian Army, spanning over 36 years. He was General Officer commanding in a military region in central India. He served in multiple senior positions in the Ministry of Defense, was General Officer commanding of a strike infantry division in 2018-19. The list is long of his senior appointments, and he was also India's defense attaché to Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia earlier in his career. And last but certainly not least, was a staff officer with our mission in Sierra Leone in 2000. Please join me on the podium. No, you're sitting over there. We'll bring the other panelists here. The second panelist is Brigadier General Sandra Kaijer, who started her officers training at the Netherlands Police Academy in 1987. She's worked as the Central Commander Safety and Security in Amsterdam, was the head of education at the Police Academy. In 2013, she was deployed as a police advisor to UNAMA, where she was responsible for the Northeast region. In 2017, she was appointed head of operations at the National Tactical Command. And as I was talking about just now, from 2021 to 23, she was seconded with the Office for Strategic Peacekeeping Partnerships, OPSP, in which she conducted many field missions and analyzed systemic problems that exist, particularly when it comes to police performance, but also, of course, in many other areas. At the moment, she's the Director of Knowledge, Strategy, and Innovation, a position she's held since February of this year, and for which she was promoted to the rank of Brigadier General. Please join us. Our third panelist is Brigadier General Pran Bahadur Pun from the Nepali Army. He was commissioned in the Nepali Army in 1991 as a graduate of the Army Command and Staff College in Nepal, the Defense Service Staff College in Wellington, India, and the U.S. Army War College in Pennsylvania. He has commanded an infantry battalion and infantry brigade. Currently, he's the director of the Directorate of Peace Operations in the Nepali Army headquarters, and has served in 3 UN missions: Lebanon, Sierra Leone, and Liberia. Last but not least, we have Josh Jurgensen, who is the UN and Peacekeeping Advisor for Civilians in Conflict. CIVIC, as I said, is an important partner for us in many areas related to POC, but also civilian harm mitigation. He supports CIVIC's research and advocacy on peacekeeping, leads CIVIC's engagement with multiple peacekeeping policy stakeholders, including the committee in New York that deals with peacekeeping, the so-called C34. Before he was at CIVIC, he worked as a consultant with us, with our department, where he conducted a comprehensive review of the mission in Liberia. And in a previous life, he was also an infantry officer in the US Army and served on a combat deployment in Afghanistan. Please join us, Josh. So I've done a quick survey of the panelists to ask them if they want to speak sitting down or standing up, and maybe not surprisingly, given the number of senior military officers on the panel, they would like to speak from the podium. So I will immediately invite our Force Commander from UNMISS to start.
Honorable ASG Matapove, Excellencies, Generals, Ambassadors, moderator of the panel, co-panelists of the session, ladies and gentlemen, a very good day to you all. Before I start, Customary thanks from the heart to the organizers and the hosts for making this event possible. I hope all those who asked questions in the previous session are here, because during this session maybe some answers and some perspectives do get thrown upon as answers to those questions. The year 1999, the first ever POC mandate to a UN mission was assigned to United Nations mission in Sierra Leone. 24 years hence, POC mandates have become expansive, have become robust, and have become the cornerstone of most mandates of United Nations peacekeeping missions. Just to know the importance, as we have already discussed, there are a total of 16 missions in history that have had a POC mandate, out of today's missions, out of 12 today's missions, we have 6 who have a POC mandate. But this statistic does not reveal the correct picture. The statistic that I think we must take care of is the fact that out of 96,000 odd peacekeepers who are there today, 90,000 are serving under some POC mandate or the other. More importantly, in the last 10 years or so, or I would even say 15 to 20 years, the civilian casualties as a proportion of overall casualties in conflicts that we are talking about has registered an increase. And therefore, this subject could not have been more topical, and therefore it needs to be in our mandates, and it needs to be something that we have to work towards addressing. Having said that, and without much ado about how we go about carrying out our POC mandates, I'll straight away jump on to challenges that we face on the ground in implementing POC mandates, which relate in some way or the other to member states and how member states can help us in overcoming these challenges. There are numerous challenges, but I'll restrict my field of view to just what is relevant to member states and what is relevant to understand or to have a conceptual view of the ground situation. First and foremost, I wish to talk about the mandate. A lot has been spoken about in the previous session, but what I want to say is, as a peacekeeper on ground, robust mandates are not the problem. Given the criticality of the POC situation the world over, mandates have got to be robust, and that's not the problem. The problem is perhaps the inconsistency in terms of changing mandates year after year, which force peacekeepers on the ground to adapt to a new mandate, and by the time they've adapted, there is another mandate, which is slightly different. So as long as there is continuity and consistency in the mandates, robust mandates are welcome, because they provide the higher direction and a higher aim for all of us to aspire for and achieve. The other problem about mandates that we would like addressed is to have some sort of a mechanism that covers the gap between expectations that the mandate raises and the resources that are provided to the mission to bridge that, to meet those expectations. Robust mandates raise expectations in the host country, in the host community, and in the minds of the international community, as well as the member states. However, when it comes to resources, however well you change the mindset, however well you get your troops oriented, your peacekeepers oriented to the job in hand, without resources, you will obviously, the gap will tell in the impact of our actions. Therefore, what we look for from the member states is to help us have the resources that are required to meet the mandate expectations. Now, conflation between UN principles and mandates, POC mandates. I personally do not think there is a serious conflation, because as military commanders, we are in the job of breaking down complex policies and formulations to an easy to understand guideline or an order to troops. So as far as I'm concerned, impartiality can be achieved in the given complex POC mandate scenario. As long as you are impartial and you have justification to do whatever you do, there isn't a problem. In terms of consent, yes, whenever consent is to be broken, when you're forced to act against actors who have allegiance to the host government or the host government actors themselves, it is not we as peacekeepers who break the agreement. Something has been done before that to break the agreement by the parties concerned. And therefore, again, consent or impartiality does not mean inaction in a POC mandate. It's easier said than done, but that is what we train our personnel to achieve. And that's the reality of the day. There is no gain saying that we cannot, go against the host government in anything. Then in most cases where the host government and its related parties are parties to the conflict to some extent, they have to abide by the agreement that they have signed and invited the United Nations, and therefore that to me poses lesser problem. The point is about drawing the red line clearly, drawing the lines of what is the expected behavior from all stakeholders in terms of the agreement that we have all signed, and thereafter sticking to them. And when the red line is crossed, we have to ensure that we do not cross the red line and we act within the parameters. If we do so, then perhaps the conflation between UN principles and mandate expectations can be overcome. Again, easier said than done, but it is not undoable. We also have a problem in terms of, a bulk of the POC mandates are better served if we are able to prevent conflicts. Conflict prevention is perhaps the best tool of ensuring POC. But unfortunately, all the conflict prevention efforts or the mission, which are in multiple domains, when successful, are not tangible. Nobody counts the number of conflicts prevented. Nobody counts the number of lives saved. What we count is the number of lives lost and the conflicts that have taken place despite our efforts. We are in a conflict zone. There's no gain saying that there would not be any failures. There will be failures in the fog of conflict. Conflicts would take place. There would be casualties. But the efficiency of a mission and the force which is part of the mission in Tier 2 actions is how well you prevent escalation of the conflict, how well you prevent a number of these conflicts. So the real problem is when a conflict is prevented, how does the world come to know? That is where I come to the point of strategic communication. Strategic communication is not to tell a lie. Strategic communication is not to dress up. It is not to create a make-believe story of what you have done or what you have not done. It is to tell the truth when nobody else is telling the truth. It is to cover that blind zone wherein the peacekeeper on ground is not able to speak for herself or himself. That is when the strategic communication helps in telling their part of the story, not the story, the true story, to the world at large. And I think that's a crying need, because the peacekeeper too needs motivation. When her or his failures are publicized and he or she is held accountable, it is also incumbent on the system to ensure that his or her achievement is also equally told to the world. So the strategic communication, we would go wrong if we believe it's a dressing up tool. No, I think it's a tool to tell the truth when nobody else is telling it. The next point I have is about the policies and formulations that we have, and even the mandates to some extent. They touch only the tip of the iceberg. They talk about what to do, what is to be done. What is absent is a clear exposition of what is not to be done, how is it to be done, how not to be done, why is it to be done, and why not to be done. So if we find answers to all this and give clarity to peacekeepers on ground, I think a lot of conflation with UN principles, as well as the seeming impossibility of robust mandates, will go away. Now, so much said. I also talked about misinformation and disinformation in the passing by talking of the importance of strategic communication. But another point I want to highlight here is there is a real threat of misinformation, which undermines disinformation too, which undermines the credibility of the United Nations. I would say undermining of the credibility of a United Nations mission in the host country is one of the serious damages that can be done to the POC mandate. And therefore, I think countering this misinformation and disinformation should definitely be one of our highest priorities. The credibility of the mission is lost, a lot of civilians suffer, a lot of lives will be lost. The credibility of the UN mission and its efforts are understood, appreciated, then it would spur the UN mission, not only in moral terms, but in terms of trust terms, to ensure that their POC delivery is far better. So countering misinformation and disinformation is not just to tell the story right, but to keep the credibility of the UN missions where it's supposed to be, and therefore more protection of civilians' achievements can be made by the mission. Now coming to mindsets. Mindset is not something that's addressed in a particular time frame, in a certain duration. It's a dynamic process. It's about leadership. It's about training. It's about development of trust between the leader and the led. It is also about standing by decisions taken in the field by peacekeepers when the decision has been taken in good faith, but for some reason it is backfired. So when that trust is there, mindset is not such a problem. Now, for instance, I can tell you certain decision dilemmas ground commanders face on the ground from military parlance. Typically say a village is attacked somewhere in South Sudan. Now, assume there has been no early warning. When there is early warning, you would have deployed in the neighborhood, you would have sent patrols to the neighborhood, shown the UN flag, reinforced your existing locations there, and thereby sort of countered the possibility of a conflict. But when there is no early warning, you suddenly realize that a conflict has broken out, then a ground commander has various options, multiple options. One of the options is to interpose his or her troops in between the conflicting parties and stop the conflict, or attack the armed faction that is perpetrating the attack, or when only armed factions are fighting and the civilians they are fleeing from the conflict zone, you may choose to neglect the armed factions and go towards the civilians who are fleeing and provide them a safe corridor to go to a location of safety. Or the other option is to look at the next possible location that may be attacked, reinforce that location, hold it like a fortress, so that civilians fleeing the conflict can take refuge there, and so on and so forth. So there are multiple options, and invariably you will not have resources for all. So the ground commander, often a captain or major, sub 30, 25 to 30 years of age, is forced to take the decision without looking over her or his shoulders. And that's the training that we try to do day in and day out, so that they can take the right decision. And the decision has to be guided by only one factor, which is which option affords the opportunity to protect maximum civilians. So here, whichever option you take, you're open to criticism later in hindsight as to why you didn't take the other option. So this is a threat which is in being and has to be accepted, and nevertheless we go on taking these decisions on a day in and day out, I'm sure, in all the peacekeeping missions. This again is a factor that everybody needs to understand, because it's easy to say why this was not done, but if you see it in the perspective of what was done and whether it did protect more civilians than otherwise, then the ground commander has done his or her job. So that is where I mean, as long as the decision is taken in good faith, on correct parameters, the system has to stand like a rock to protect that commander for the decision that has been taken. If that is done, mindset is not an issue. If there is trust in the soldier on ground that the system would support him or her in terms of good faith decisions that have been taken, then half the problem of mindset is solved. The problem of mindset that cannot be solved is the one of political caveats that we spoke about in the morning. That's something that member states have to ensure, that when you pledge troops, please pledge that there will be no political caveat. Military caveats are not there. Political caveats, if they are there, then military leadership cannot achieve much on the ground, because for that soldier or for that unit, the political caveat from the host, from his country is perhaps inviolable. Therefore, one request is there are no political caveats, there are no caveats on ground by troops. In fact, our TCCs have undertake a lot of beyond the charter duties. I can tell you in most of our TOBs, temporary operating bases, TCCs live in serious amount of discomfort. They are supposed to occupy a base for only 28 days, whereas these temporary bases sometimes, due to operational reasons, remain for 2 years. The ability, given the infrastructural deficiency in the countries we operate, the ability of the mission to give them reasonable comfort is limited, although everybody is trying their best. In this bargain, in this situation, almost all contingents have been in these TOBs without a murmur of protest, at least as far as UNMISS is concerned. I can talk of Rwandans in Buj, who last year stood at 1 meter water throughout the wet season and operated from their base. I can talk of Ghanaians in Koch, I can talk of Ethiopians in Tambura, I can talk of Indians in Akobo and Kodok. So all contingents have actually borne the discomfort that comes out of an operational necessity without a murmur of protest, and therefore there are no military caveats to say, so to say. The problem is only political caveats, which can only be addressed by the member countries in ensuring that you provide the commanders on the ground and the leadership of the mission, troops and units which are absolutely caveat-free. Okay. Now coming to the adequacy of our footprint. We also have to think about adequacy of resources from a different point of view. If somebody has been in Afghanistan, we can just compare. Afghanistan and South Sudan, just to quote an example, are of the same landmass, approximately 623 to 650 square kilometers. Now, in Afghanistan, at a peak of its conflict-prone situation, there were 130,000 troops with the best of weaponry the world can assemble. You have in South Sudan 14,000 troops. 14,000 is a large number, but relative terms you can decide. A country that is of a size twice that of Germany, 14,000 troops with reasonably primitive equipment compared to what is there in Afghanistan. So there are resource constraints and also for certain principal constraints in United Nations that we have to bear in mind when we assess the impact of POC actions by missions. There is so much more to tell, but I can only tell you that any assessment of impact of POC, of peacekeepers, has to take in regard first their achievements. Look at conflicts that would have been there if those peacekeepers were not there. Looks at lives that would have been lost if they were not there. Sometimes protection of civilians is not just by weapons alone. You know, we have a situation necessitated by climate change and other vagaries in a state called Bentiu, Unity in South Sudan, where there is a internally displaced people's camp of 177,000 people. We protect these people not only from violent attacks from elsewhere, but also from floods, unprecedented floods in the history of South Sudan, not seen in the last 60 years. Now, how the United Nations is protecting them is by a system of dikes, a 25-kilometer of dikes around the entire camp and in fact the entire village or town of Bentiu. On 7th and 8th of October last year, a 21-meter by 9-meter breach took place in this dike, resulting in water flowing in a gush like a river into the IDP camp. On any account, there were 40 to 50,000 people who were simply not mobile, the old, infirm, the ones who didn't have limbs, children, a number of them. Had that breach not been fixed, I think we would have been sitting with 30 to 40,000 casualty that night. But 48 hours, peacekeepers and community members stood together, military and civilian alike, in a human chain, filled up sandbags and filled that breach. So this is also protection of civilians. What I mean to say is protection of civilians takes numerous hues, and missions are doing their best wherever they can. So any assessment of the impact should take into account the successes. Failures have to be talked about. We have to improve from failures. But there is no possible scenario in peacekeeping where there would be a situation without failures. So therefore, it is, it's important to realize this. The other question about civilians, again, I feel from military terms, it's easy for us to define. What is a civilian to most of us on ground is any person who does not in any way participate in the conflict and is actually fleeing from the conflict. Anybody who in whatever way is promoting the conflict is not a civilian and is therefore not entitled to the protection that the United Nations provides. And when in doubt about understanding who is and who is not, err on the side of caution and cover the people in the gray zone. So that these are the simplistic orders that we have to work with on ground, and therefore that gives a certain element of clarity to troops. We really cannot carry the ambiguities that we express in such conferences which are there, which need to be solved, but we cannot carry these ambiguities to the field. In the field, there have to be clear-cut, crystal orders. So what do we require finally from the member states? If I can just summarize, I mentioned it in the passing. First, consistent mandates. Let them be high on expectations. Expect us to do what is required to be done, but let it be consistent and let it be matched by the resources that you provide us. When you go for pledging, please pledge units with absolutely the best of equipment, best of trained manpower, and which can fill the gap between expectations and the possibility of achieving them by missions. Be involved, visit the missions, interact with us, interact with the leadership on the ground to know our constraints, our challenges, our achievements, and our failures. Exhort the host governments in various missions to ensure that they stand their part of the bargain in the agreement that they signed in terms of behavior that is non-partisan and the behavior that doesn't violate the principles of the agreement, so that we do not violate we are not violating, but we do not do what is impartial and what is absolutely required as per the mandate. Do assist the host governments in capacity building. As rightly said, missions alone cannot do capacity building. We can only give modicum marginal support. So therefore, if member states can help in certain niche areas of capacity building, that would definitely help. One of the foremost issues that I would like member states to concentrate is on pre-deployment training. Development of the right mindset, development of a mindset which tells them that you're going to do a critical job, not going for a vacation, going for a very critical job, a very complex job, more than what you would normally encounter in a national scenario, where you would have to work with multiple stakeholders in a multinational environment and still achieve results greater than in national scenarios. So the importance and the criticality of the job that they're going to perform has to be told. The mindset has to be developed. They will be provided weapons, equipment, armament, ammunition of the top class category that you can provide, and ensure that everybody has a reasonable tenure. There are peacekeepers getting rotated in 6 months tenure, which does more harm than good. So I would request that tenures, long tenures of 1 year minimum be ensured. And caveat-free performance we have talked about. And as far as women peacekeepers are concerned, provide them in the numbers that are required, provide them with the level of training that is required, provide them with a level of capabilities, make them fit for the job that they make them fit the job description, and thereafter I think things would improve. Engagement of women in military components sets a very good example for the host government, which is trying to build its armed forces. So they can leapfrog from a certain level they are there to that of a modern professional force if there are more women in our contingents. With these few words, there is much more to share, but I'm sure I'll be told to shut up and sit down by the moderator. So I'll call it a day. And is there any issues that need to be amplified? We'll handle them in the question and answer sessions. Thank you very much.
Generals, participants, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for the opportunity and the honor to join this panel and share my experiences. I have been working as an expert on police performance in the Office of Peacekeeping Strategic Partnerships for the last 2 years, in which I have reviewed almost all peace missions, executed investigations on SEA risk factors, identified systemic issues, and conducted stress exercises on CASEVAC. I'd like to use this opportunity to share my experiences on the ground in the deep field of the missions. From that perspective, I would like to focus on 4 elements that are critical for POC: integration, mindset, valuable means, and effects, including accountability. First of all, I have seen a lot of differences between policies and the reality in the deep field. Although that sounds like an open door, there's more to it. All the fundamental work that is done in developing focus and understanding of POC has been and is essential. But the effectiveness of the execution of POC in the deep field is highly dependent on the way the mission is able to make a successful translation and adaptation of the policies and plans to different levels. And finally, to the local situation in that remote village up in the mountains for that small community surrounded by rival armed groups. Peace and security are huge quantities, but for communities and individuals, these perceptions are small and basic. It is centered around them. It is limited to their living environments. They can feel it and they can describe their feelings about it when asked the right questions. They can also describe the factors that make them feel safe and often even the visible indicators that it is safe, like an open market, children playing and going to school, the safety of solo women to collect wood, etc. A man in a community told me once, "I can now sleep without my boots on," after a robust battalion was finally deployed in his area. Maybe an unexpected but a powerful indicator. The uniforms are the bridge enablers for locals to sustainable peace. The way the uniform define their processes and the way they support and facilitate civilians determines whether they will end up in the driver's seat or that they will depend on the mission in a non-balanced way. And of course, this includes making sure that the uniformed have all the tools to their disposal to prevent, track, mitigate, and address civil harm as an unintended consequence of their own operations, the importance of which becomes more and more recognized in our conversation about UN peace missions. POC should be grounded in community engagement and should therefore be a collaborative whole-of-society endeavor. Community-centered, local systems and strategies that civilians use for their self-protection should be the main focus for protection from the mission components. Realistic threat assessments of each region and area must be done. Often we see commanders simply applying the overall threat assessment into their area. Each area has different dynamics and therefore requires a different posture while implementing the mandate and protecting civilians. Civil society can play a vital role in the translation and sustainability of these insights. They can enrich information and intelligence, can function as a manager of expectations, and can bridge the rotations and cultural differences. And in doing so, civil society can play a major role in dramatically reducing the risks of any form of civilian harm by any actor. From mission perspective, the need for integration and joint efforts should be visible and tangible in the mission plan and POC strategy, with coordinated, sequenced and integrated goals, planning and activities. The different roles of military and police can and should enforce each other, with community-oriented policing and building trust in security forces as a focus for the police, enabled by the robust and proactive protection of civilians by the force. From patrolling to engagement activities, those should never be conducted in an isolated way by the components. A deep understanding of needs and ways of protection of civilians, including incorporating civil harm mitigation in the UN's own operational conduct, is required and should define the framework of the situational awareness of the mission. Openness to adapt to local effective ways, connecting to social cohesion and facilitate traditional mechanisms will both serve the adequate protection and the trust and relationship with the communities. It will improve the effectiveness and relationship between the mission, civil society, and the population. And it also improves, in a sustainable way, transitions and missions exit strategies. Cooperation and sometimes integration with civilian protection initiatives works as a multiplier for POC. I have seen some good examples of that in both MONUSCO and UNMISS. This diversifies and broadens the approaches of POC, and the effects of patrolling in a coordinated and joint way with civilian security groups has so many positive effects on the perception of security, the perception of the role of both the UN and the local societies, and it builds trust in multiple ways. Also, facilitating and supporting these kind of unarmed civilian protection teams in multiple ways can be an easy, quick, and low-cost win. Often they just need basic equipment like radios, flashlights, and gumboots. Putting people in the driver's seat also means cooperating and facilitating in a low-key and practical way. Community engagement is often misunderstood and reduced to civic activities like the distribution of food, water, and services. Rather than a two-way partnership, community engagement tends to be viewed as an assistance provided to populations and implemented in a way that aggravates dependency, rather than as an opportunity to gain situational awareness, to inform planning and operations, and pursue people-centered, locally led approaches to POC and stabilization. Engagement should reach beyond informal chats to generally influence POC planning and execution, and to establish an information and dialogue flow which can be used to plan and to monitor effects. Besides being effective in the operations, this will gain trust and common understanding. This separation of community engagement from POC operations is even stronger when it comes to engagement with women. Women in the communities often have an early warning system via their own communications and have their radar system for developments amongst groups of people. They can play important roles as peace observers and peace protectors, and should be acknowledged in their ideas and ways about ways and means for POC needs. I have seen excellent examples of women influencing activities of armed groups. Although the power is often not balanced in societies, it does not mean that the involvement and participation of women should be approached as a separate project. Integrate them in community dialogues, not just in gender-separated meetings by female engagement or mixed engagement teams. And use these interventions also for the empowerment of women as peace brokers. Patrolling is a powerful instrument to protect civilians and should always be seen in relation to engagements, informations, and the effects it should achieve. It is a powerful way of delivering messages to all stakeholders, if it's done in the right way. Patrols with a purpose and not just numbers are key. Active and engaging patrols with a purpose will lead to an increased level of situational awareness, as well as it builds confidence with the population. Engagement is pivotal before, during, and after patrolling. Premises that patrolling should take place when communities need these most are often not met. When uniformed are not conducting night patrols, or when they interpreted SOFAs as restrictions to patrol in a certain way, one knows that the supply and demands on protection of civilians are not met. My experience is that the what-if questions that one poses to the uniformed components in the field, how to act when confronted with the threats civilians meet, are hardly answered with convincing, conscious, action-driven answers by the uniformed mission components. Although POC is educated and trained in the pre-deployment training, the physical interpretation in the field, including the interpretation of the rules of engagement and the use of force, is crucial to meet the context and difficulties in their area of responsibility. Scenario training in the field in a combined, integrated, or joint manner with the different components is yet underdeveloped. The dilemmas that can arise in the different phases of possible action and against different parties demand a profound understanding and action framework in the field. Understanding the scenarios and dilemmas includes the possible harm of non-action in a threatening situation. I think the mindset of peacekeepers is the most powerful way of achieving sustainable results in terms of protection of civilians. Commanders too often miss the genuine understanding of what their purpose is. At all levels, especially lower levels, they need to truly understand the operational environment, the mandate, and what is required of their tasking. Too often, commanders lean on the regular ways of deployment, their CONOPS and operational standards. It is a solid foundation, but in the field, peacekeepers have to have a mindset that is generally able to put the community's safety and security interests and needs first, which might need different postures and tasking, depending on what is required to prevent, deter, and respond to threats to civilians, including mitigation of risks of civil harm as unintended consequences of UN's own military and police operations. Trust is a fragile virtue for peacekeepers. Therefore, commanders, the leadership in the field, needs to profoundly understand the requirements of the mandate, embedded in a high level of situational awareness, including community-specific needs. And they always have to ask themselves, what can I do more? I already mentioned the importance of community engagement, of situational awareness, and understanding of the mandate and its consequences in terms of preventive, deterring, or responsive action to threats to civilians. I would also like to plead for a community-centered approach when it comes to measuring the outcomes and effects of POC efforts. The combination of data and dialogue can result in a broad spectrum of indicators, and again, I would like to highlight the need to adjust to what communities themselves define as indicators to an improved security situation. That can range from the ability to shop at an open market, for children going to school, for the freedom of movement for women, etc. The effects and outcomes of the action or non-action of peacekeepers should be part of a constant feedback loop. Quick response and evaluation of incidents, including unintended incidents of civil harm by the mission itself, provides opportunities for damage control, promotes the learning ability, builds trust, and might stop negative narratives. Accountability also means transparency in lessons learned in side effects, like environmental effects. But accountability is also needed for positive interventions, especially in relations to Stratcom. Its narrative will be an important message to the population and will be a learning and recognition experience for peacekeepers and an example for leadership. And with that, I'd like to conclude for now, and I'll be happy to discuss any points or examples in this session. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and namaste. Today I'll be talking about Nepali Army's field experiences on protection of civilian. Though it may sound tactical, but I'm sure it has a strategic impact. As a TCC, Nepal ranks second in overall troops contributors and first among female participation in UN peace operation. At present, Nepali peacekeepers are deployed into 6 missions with POC mandates. So this paper aims to share the Nepali Army's field experiences in the protection of civilians and the best practices adopted. In line with the mission's POC strategy, some of the POC's related specific roles and responsibilities undertaken by the Nepali peacekeepers are patrolling. Nepali contingents have been deploying highly visible patrol both on foot and vehicle to continuously dominate key areas and to collect information. These have been effective in deterring the armed elements while also giving confidence to the local population. In MONUSCO and MINUSCA, the Nepali peacekeepers are also conducting joint patrol with National Armed Forces. While IDPs camps generally tend to settle near and around UN camps, many IDP camps are relatively far away from the camp. The Nepali peacekeepers, together with other protection actors, are continuously monitoring and carrying out patrols for the security of IDP camps. In MONUSCO mission, the Nepali contingent has gone a step further by establishing early warning mechanism in IDP sites, including alarm system and solar lighting, to enhance the security and response capabilities. Engagement teams have been crucial to the contingent for effective interaction with the communities, in particular with the local women and girls. Trained female peacekeepers are part and parcel of all the patrols and engagement activities conducted by the contingents. To ensure a shared understanding and approach to prevent the risks to risks and threat to civilians, key leadership engagement is vital to UN missions. The unit commanders, COB and TOB commanders and focal officers have been conducting regular engagement with administrators, village chiefs, and local and tribal leaders like the paramount chief. This helps peacekeepers to better understand the protection issues, needs, and priorities of the locals. Community outreach program. CIVIC activities have been given due priority by the Nepali Army. The Nepalese contingent, in coordination with the Mission CIVIC branch, have conducted various QUIP and CIVIC projects. This engagement outreach, community outreach program have ensured prolonged and continuous engagement with the community, thereby providing a credible deterrence to the likely spoilers while boosting the confidence of the local population and building a positive perception of the mission. Now, I will apprise you about some of the challenges based on the field experiences. Restriction of the movement. In some missions, there is a provision for seeking prior approval from the host governments for the conduct of operation and verification patrols. Convoys and patrols are often stopped at checkpoints established both by the government forces and armed groups. In South Sudan, there is a restriction on movement during the night hours due to the curfew. The restriction of movement has limited the mission's ability to effectively respond during crisis. Terrain and weather. Limited road accesses to the public settlements and the vast and rugged terrains have often adversely affected the conduct of operation in most of the UN missions in Africa. The majority of the roads networks are unpaved and in a poor state. During rainy seasons, roads are marshy and slippery, affecting the prompt response and outreach activities. Expectation management. The field missions have their own limitation in terms of capabilities and AOR. However, the international and the local communities expect field mission to succeed every time, especially to promptly respond to the incident related to the physical protection of the civilians. Likewise, overstretched deployment has been forcing missions and contingents, including Nepali contingents, to dedicate a majority of their operational capacity to escorting logistic convoys and self-protection. Thus, the management of expectation of the local and the international community is a big challenge. Language barrier is in most of the francophonic countries, and the limited number of language assistants available in the contingents in MONUSCO, UNMISS, MINUSMA, and UNISWA has restricted peacekeepers' engagement with the community. This has limited the capability to gain information and also sensitize the local population, especially with issues related to CRSB, C, child protection, IED awareness, and so on. Distinguished guests, now I will share some of the best practices adopted by the Nepali Army. Mindset and posture. The mindset and posture of peacekeepers in peacekeeping missions are of utmost importance. We ensure that Nepali peacekeepers are equipped with the right mindset as they deploy into mission areas. Our adaptability and innate ability to swiftly integrate with the local population, caveat-free deployment, as well as our inherent resilience make us exceptionally well suited for peacekeeping roles and protection duties. We emphasize mission command at lower echelon and reinforce during pre-deployment training. Similarly, the posture of peacekeepers is integral to the success of peacekeeping mission. Nepali peacekeepers are renowned for their readiness and willingness to tackle any given task regardless of circumstances. This resilience and readiness are instilled through rigorous years of training and regimentation, which is further reinforced during pre-deployment training. Meaningful participation of female peacekeepers. Within our ranks, we are committed to empower female peacekeepers by granting them active roles in decision-making. This ensures the integration of female perspective in the planning and execution of peacekeeping operation, facilitating an in-depth understanding of the unique needs and vulnerabilities faced by the local women and children. Furthermore, female peacekeeper holds key appointment within our units, reinforcing our dedication to meaningful participation. Having more women in peace operation enhances the mission's ability to interact and support diverse segments of civil population, especially women and children. Selection of commanders for UN mission. Firstly, commander of unit securing first position during operational readiness inspection competition is selected for co-opted appointment, that of contingent commander. Secondly, commander has to go through merit-based selection process that includes written test, situation-based presentation, and board interview. Likewise, potential contingent commanders should be PSC and must have minimum required ACR percentage. Lastly, minimum of 1 year command is mandatory. Knowledge transfer. Another contributing factor to a successful POC operation is continuous transfer of knowledge and experience. Each of our contingent comprises of at least 40% of second and third timer who carry previous experiences with them. During the pre-deployment training, knowledge transfer is ensured through periodic VTC with the unit in the field mission, in particular with contingent commanders, operation, logistic, and other key appointments. Likewise, they also conduct mission-specific training and CPX and FTX for new contingents that is going to be deployed very soon. Nepal Army has started imparting French language in addition to the English language. This has elevated the need to depend on local interpreters, especially during the various operational activities and community outreach program. Likewise, Nepal Army will also be imparting Arabic language training to peacekeepers. Few recommendations. Effective implementation of POC requires a holistic approach at strategic, operational, and tactical levels. At strategic level, there is a need for a robust force generation in order to ensure that adequate military and police personnel are provided for each mission, along with their necessary equipment and logistic support. Likewise, early warning mechanism of the contingent needs to be enhanced. Hence, to enhance early warning system in the mission area that help detect and respond to the potential threat against the civilians, the statement of unit requirement, SUR, to include new technologies as a part of COE should be revised. At operational level, as stated earlier, freedom of movement is must for the peacekeeper to implement mission mandate. Therefore, all concerned should coordinate with the host state to ensure freedom of the movements of peacekeepers. Similarly, gender-sensitive approach to civilian protection within peacekeeping missions are of paramount importance. In many conflict zones, gender-based violence is prevalent. Gender-sensitive approaches recognize that men, women, boys, girls may experience conflict and its consequences differently. Hence, missions should continuously train peacekeepers and build their capacity in protection-related skill and understanding of local cultures and languages. Expectation management is another factor to be reckoned with. UN peacekeeping mission should develop and implement effective communication strategies to manage misinformation or disinformation and expectation of local community. The mission needs to be maintain credibility and trust with local communities. Mission must ensure that accurate and relevant information is disseminated to the local population regarding mission activities, goals, mandates, in particular about how the mission plans to execute the POC strategies. Additionally, identification of critical indication and sharing information amongst all mission components are of paramount importance. Drones and UAVs are exceptionally valuable in information collection. Nevertheless, certain missions encounter challenges in promptly deploying these assets. For instance, the case of the MONUSCO, where centralized control hampers agility. Information is time sensitive. Therefore, a mechanism to pass the information to the military component in the field at the earliest through the quickest means must be implemented. At tactical level, enhanced community engagement is a key. Contingent commanders should foster direct and meaningful relations with local communities, including regular dialogue with the community leaders to better understand their needs and concerns. Likewise, QUIP projects should be emphasized, which help strengthening relationship with the local community. Imparting vocational training can be an important option besides CIMIC and QUIP project for equipping the population with requisite skill and knowledge. Similarly, contingent should develop and support local early warning system that engage the community in identifying and reporting threats. Sensitizing program is crucial. Units should continuously conduct awareness and sensitizing program on the protection of civilians, including gender-based violence, human trafficking, and child exploitation. In sum, the female engagement team can play an important role in this initiative. Also, the contingent needs to support the mission's campaign to maintain credibility and trust with the local communities by providing transparent and timely information. The contingent PIO should constantly monitor local news and media and provide timely feedback to the mission headquarters and address such issues whenever possible at the local level. To conclude, despite the host nation's primary responsibility of protecting the civilian, much is expected from the UN peacekeeping missions. UN peace operations must do everything within their capabilities for the protection of civilians. POC needs a pragmatic and comprehensive approach from all concerned stakeholders. The POC action should encompass a broad range of activities like assisting the host state through political process, socio-economic and security reform to address root causes, engagement with the community. Every stakeholder has an active duty to protect, and all must be accountable. Thank you very much.
And thank you to my fellow panelists, the generals. Thank you to the co-organizers and especially our host, Rwanda. This is my first time in Rwanda, and I took the opportunity yesterday to visit the Genocide Memorial. And one of the lessons that you can't help but take from visiting the Genocide Memorial and the museum is the failure of the international community, including UNAMIR, to protect civilians here 29 years ago. 5 years after the genocide, there was a report requested by the Secretary General that was independently conducted to identify the sources of the failure of the UN in Rwanda. Some of the factors that it identified were the under-resourcing of the mission to fulfill its mandate, the lack of political support from the Security Council and the rest of the international community, TCC caveats placed on the contingent's participation in the mission, and poor coordination within the UN. And I think, unfortunately, today we've heard all of those mentioned as challenges that are still facing the protection of civilians by peacekeeping missions. To introduce Civic a bit more, to move on from that note, Civic is celebrating its 20th year this year. Civic works with armed actors and communities in conflict to develop and implement solutions to prevent, mitigate, and address civilian harm from armed conflict. We work in 8 countries around the world currently, working directly with governments, militaries, and communities themselves to try to prevent and mitigate and address civilian harm. Our peacekeeping program has been around for 10 years now, and we conduct comprehensive research into the protection of civilians by peacekeeping missions. So today I hope to bring some of the lessons from that research to you and to speak specifically to capacities that we feel member states can help support to improve the implementation of POC mandates. To finish the thought about UNAMIR, though, I just wanted to note that as sort of an aside, because I'm not going to talk about host state consent, but I thought it was really striking to hear someone say earlier this afternoon that a peacekeeping mission should never oppose the host government. To say that here in Kigali, even 29 years after the genocide is pretty troubling, to be honest. But I want to speak to more operational issues, not host state consent. And I'll speak to 3 functional areas that Civic's research has shown are key for protection of civilians and also face challenges still. And then I'll talk about 3 areas of specific capacities, like I said. So the first functional area is early warning and rapid response. Civic has published 2 reports on this issue. And although early warning systems have been gradually improving in peacekeeping missions, there are still challenges related to having consistent mission level SOPs, the development and fielding of tools that help speed up the early warning cycle, and most importantly, the failure to respond quickly on time in a lot of situations, and the failure to be able to effectively follow up on what's happened when there's a response or not a response to an early warning, which I think the force commander spoke to. The second area is integration, which has been covered. I won't go too much into it, but just to say that there's still a lot of challenges that have existed for a long time. Within missions, integration is challenged by issues sharing information across mission components, challenges of conducting joint analysis and planning, and then of course coordinating mandate implementation across components. There's still silos among missions, of course, as everyone knows, but also not within peacekeeping missions, but looking more broadly, we can't lose sight of the need to prepare for transition, as was mentioned earlier today. And part of that involves supporting other actors beyond the peacekeeping mission who are going to take on protection roles, even while the peacekeeping mission is still deployed and while it's transitioning and after it leaves. So there's still a need for capacity to be able to conduct integrated analysis and planning and carrying out protection activities outside of the peacekeeping mission. And then the third area is civilian harm mitigation, which has been discussed. Civilian harm mitigation, I think one main lesson is just that there are kind of ad hoc ways in which missions are actively mitigating the harm of their operations to civilians, but it's not systematized yet, and the UN is working on that. I think it's important to note that CHM is not just, civilian harm mitigation, is not just important because it's a moral imperative for missions, and also because it helps mitigate the risk of popular discontent with missions if there's an incident of civilian harm, but also because it should be a way not of constraining the mission, but of enabling a proactive and robust implementation of mission mandates when the risks to civilians of mission activities are understood, they're identified, they're addressed systematically, and then any incidents of harm there's some follow-up, some way of addressing that harm. And so just a lesson that it's not about constraining missions, but it's about enabling action responsibly. So the three categories of capacities I'd like to talk about. First is mobility. I don't think I'm the most qualified person in the panel to talk about the mobility assets that are needed, but civics research has looked specifically at air assets, and as well as counter-explosive device capabilities. And so those are things that we think are very important, not just for enabling responses by the uniformed components to protection threats, but also to allow the sort of integrated responses, civilian-led programming and support to local protection efforts that have been discussed in an integrated way. And then the second category, integrated analysis and planning. There's really important gaps in the integrated units in missions like the strategic planning units, the JMACs and JOCs that integrate the different components, but are under-resourced for the responsibilities that they have, which are very important. And so those specific capacities are ones that civics research has continuously shown are really important and are under-resourced. So we would encourage member states to support those capacities like planners and analysts and operations coordinators, both military and police and civilian. But those are mission headquarters capacities, and we also need to look at the deep field, at the capacities that there are in field offices to be able to integrate mission responses closer to where the protection threats actually are. And so there also needs to be an improvement in the quantity and the level of those types of capacities, planners and analysts and coordinators in field offices. And I think there's ways that member states can support the UN to do that. And then finally, community engagement. I won't say too much on community engagement. I think the documents that were passed out by PACS that you have in front of you are both really great resources on the specific capacities that can help support community engagement as well as civilian harm mitigation. I would just say that community engagement that's done safely and effectively supports all of the functional areas that I had talked about before. It's a necessity for being able to effectively and quickly gather information about protection threats to inform early warning systems. It's important for being able to understand the risks that missions can pose to civilians directly or indirectly, to be able to inform civilian harm mitigation efforts. And it's also of course, required to be able to shape locally informed and civilian-led responses to protection threats. And then finally, just to note, our research has also looked a little bit at engagement units and women's participation in peacekeeping. And just the lesson from that is just to encourage not only pledging those capacities and more women in operational roles, both uniformed and civilian, but to make sure that those capacities are really integrated with the rest of the protection efforts of the mission. Often, there's a sense that if there's an engagement platoon or engagement unit, then that box is checked. But in reality, there's a lot of extra work that needs to be done to integrate their work into the rest of the mission. So with that, I thank you very much.
Thank you, Josh, for those comments. You're probably all suffering from slight information overload after these 4 very rich presentations. I will not attempt to draw out any points given the limited time we have left for questions, comments, etc. From the floor. I hope we have mics again that will be passed around to anyone who wants to speak. I'm just looking at our colleagues here in the back to make sure that mics are going to be available. And want to recognize the first intervention on the floor over here. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much. I'm Bahita Stephen. I'm from South Sudan. I'm working with Nonviolent Peace Force. We work also on protection of civilians. And then our mandate is UCP, maybe you have heard of it, as NP, an armed civilian protection. We believe in community engagement that is a powerful tool for sustainable peace in the community. Once I was an IDP since 2013, since the conflict started in South Sudan, and I was among the beneficiaries of the UN peacekeeping. I'm very happy also that I was hosted by the UN peacekeeping. And but for the long run also, we have seen there is a need to support the UN peacekeeping through the civilian protection skills as well, because like NP and other civil society organizations, they are focusing more on how to engage the local community to take the ownership of the POC or the protection of civilians. Because we cannot say that the peace will be sustainable if we always talk about having the resources only for the mission to continue. Until when is that peace going to be sustainable? That means we are creating dependency for the government not to take the responsibility of protection of civilians. And then the government will continue buying time because they will ignore that it is their responsibility to protect their civilians. Therefore, as a person who was is still a civilian, because I'm still living in Bentiu IDP camp up to now, because it has been transitioned from POC to Bentiu IDP camp. I'm talking from experience and the great work the UN peacekeeping is doing in the ground. But is limited due to this flooding as well, as the unit state is flooded, and also is limited because there is a need for cooperation between the UN peacekeeping and the civil organizations in the ground. As much as we need the presence of the uniformed men and women, we also need the civil society organizations to build the capacity of the local community so that this protection of civilians will be sustainable. One of the great things that NP is doing in the ground is having a local community protection teams. I think our colleagues who came from Bentiu, you know that. We have women protection teams, and we have youth protection teams, and also we have male gender champions. These are locally trained men and women and youth so that they can train other community. And they are trained based on the local capacities. And they apply the cultural values, since in culture, in many cultures, men, they were assigned to provide the protection. Now, these women and men, their work is to remind the communities that we are not violent. We are naturally created. We are loving fathers. We are loving brothers. So what happened in the middle? I believe there is a need for the mission and the civil society organization to work together so that while the mission is carrying on the uniform work, although the civil society organization, because they have that capacity as well, this will enhance the sustainability of peace. We don't need no longer to live in POCs. Maybe many of you do not know how it's hard to live in POC. It creates the dependency syndrome to the extent that you think you are vulnerable forever, but yet you are strong. We need that spirit to build their capacity so that they know they are strong. I have lived for more than 8 years in POC, and it felt so bad because even if you have the talent, you cannot express it because you will be only seen as a vulnerable person. I don't need anyone to live like that because it's not good to be in POC. The real POC is when I'm living and staying, like when I came to Kigali, I felt so safe the moment I landed. This is the safety we need. This is the real POC we need. We don't need POC where it's guarded by military, and then me, I'm being protected from my own government. Is that the real peace we need? It's not that real peace we need. We need sustainable peace, where even the mission goes, but peace continue to rise. And then the more we'll have few POCs, then the more we'll have very peaceful communities. How many times are we going to ask for resources to build POCs? The world is going bad. As we know now in many countries, there are many wars. And civil society organization and UN peacekeeping need to work for sustainable development activities rather than dependency activities that will keep us hostage all the time. I appreciate UN peacekeeping a lot, and I appreciate all the civil society organizations. And therefore, it's good to work together instead of competing for one civil society or for one civilians. Let us work together as a world so that all these resources, we put it in one basket and then help the community rise. And then we leave them while they continue with the projects that we have done with them. And then we go to another places where they need it the most. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that very powerful intervention. I'll take a couple more.
Yes, thank you. I'm Anne from the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. First of all, thank you to the organizers and to the panelists. I have one rather short question. It might sound a bit naive, but I'm wondering, you have this recurring challenge of freedom of movement. And it seems that very often in missions, there is a tendency that missions seek permission before they are actually moving. And I was wondering, could missions be, or peacekeepers be more insisting, actually moving without asking for previous permission? Thank you.
My name is Ruby Jaspreet. I'm Director for United Nations Political Division in the Ministry of External Affairs of India. Thank you, panelists, for your very valuable remarks. I just have a few comments to make on behalf of India. There's just a few things I'd like to add to the ongoing discussion. Through all this session since morning, we all agree that there has been an unprecedented resurgence in armed conflicts around the globe. These conflicts, we've come to an agreement, are marked by not just interstate conflicts, but also intrastate conflicts. Conflict today, we are finding, is more fractured, incoherent, and volatile. What India as a nation is also seeing that conflict situations have become much more violent today because of involvement of non-state actors, particularly terrorists and armed groups, which has led to an unprecedented level of attack on civilian population as well as UN peacekeepers. The terrorists are not only exploiting existing political, social grievances among local communities, but they're also disseminating false propaganda against UN peacekeepers. I would like to add that India has always maintained that the primary responsibility of ensuring safety and security of populations, including the maintenance of essential services, rests with the national governments. With our collective experiences that we've all had over the past few decades, we do now have a set of international principles which places no less responsibility on the aggressor to ensure that civilians are not targeted in situations of armed conflicts. In the face of this aggression, it is equally incumbent on states to protect those who are putting their lives in the line of fire, which means that we need to protect the protectors as well. Last thing I want to add is that we believe that protection of civilians is a whole of mission approach. I heard other voices saying the same thing today. Since the underlying causes of conflict are primarily social and economical, the solutions also need to come from these domains. And while peacekeeping can create a space to address these causes, the addressal itself has to be done through political and social processes of missions. As I conclude, I'll take the floor for just half a minute more to share that India is one of the largest troop contributing countries. We have 278,000 peacekeepers. We've had them over 7 decades for various UN missions. Today we are deployed in 10 out of 12 missions. We also acknowledge the role of women in peacekeeping. And we were the first country which sent an all-women contingent in Liberia, which was there from 2007 to 2016. Thank you for your time. Thanks.
You've just heard from the previous speaker who said she was in a POC camp. She was saying POC, but actually she was in a POC camp. So they are being protected while put in one camp. But under POC mandate, and you said you have forces in 6 POC mandated missions, you can provide protection to civilians through deterrence. This means you are able to carry out preemptive operations so that these guys do not come where the civilians are. Have you had challenges to this? Carrying out preemptive operations to the negative forces in order to stop them from coming to the population to destabilize it. The second one is the plight of these peacekeepers of yours. Have you come across a challenge where these peacekeepers themselves are under serious threat from, 1, the civilians themselves they want to protect, 2, the negative attitude of the government of the host nation, and 3, the negative forces themselves? Have you come across that, and how have you been taking it? Thank you.
I think it's probably most appropriate to actually go back in the same order, in part because a number of questions that were asked in the statement we heard earlier specifically relate to South Sudan. So no one better placed to respond to those questions and comments than the Force Commander of UNMISS. So please go ahead.
Okay, about the lady from Bentiu IDP camp, I have nothing to comment except that I agree with you totally. That the POC camp builds in a certain degree of dependency over time. But then you're yourself a shining example of how the POC camp has helped rehabilitate people. And there are many such examples that you may be aware of. Actually, Bentiu is not the right example because Bentiu, in addition to the violence, has suffered from unprecedented floods. And therefore, the entire state of unity is displaced. So it's very difficult for the problem to be solved overnight. But in principle, there is no argument on what you say. Like if you yourself said that the mission initially had POC camps. Slowly, we transferred 4 of the 5 major POC camps that we had to the host government for management. And from many of these camps, there has been dilution of IDPs. People have gone back to their villages. But unfortunately, not so in Bentiu. The United Nations mission, our mission handles only the Malakal POC camp, which also in due course will be handed over. So we are very conscious of the primacy of the host government in managing security of its citizens. We also totally agree with you in terms of the dependency that this life in a POC camp may, breeds, which needs to be countered. But then having said that, there are realities of conflict, realities of climate change. We have to work through them. So agree with you totally. Then coming to the freedom of movement, which again I think is a reference to the South Sudan situation. Yes, the status of forces agreement between the government of South Sudan and the UN says that we would inform them before we go. I'm using the words carefully. Inform. We are free to go everywhere in the country. which we maintain, and we do not accept denials very easily. But however, in the same Status of Forces agreement, there is a paragraph which says that the government of South Sudan is responsible for the safety of peacekeepers, which is sort of given them the feel, and it has been agreed upon by us that we have no problem in informing you. However, you have to process this information and acknowledge this information, not permission. We are very much free to go. Sometimes when they state a problem, we accept it and not go. Sometimes where it is critical for our operation, we say at our own risk and move. So this is the theoretical percept. In practice, how does it translate? In practice, what happens is we make a monthly, let's say a pre-planned patrolling program, which is by and large about 90% of our patrols. Now these patrols, 90% of them go. I'm not saying 90% of them go, but all of them go, and none of them is subjected to largely by the host government. What happens is the short duration patrols, which are more critical in terms of operations, wherein it deals with an emergency, again there is no issue, but wherein we want to visit an area where the government or the government-linked forces are operating, the government normally tries to deny us access. Every access denial is followed up through various mechanisms we have kept in place. So the truth is somewhere in the gray zone between we have to seek permission and we are moving freely. So it is not that we have to seek permission. I can quote a number of examples where they have not acknowledged our movement, but we have still gone. I can also quote you examples where the government has expressed a reservation and we have not gone, where we found the reservation justifiable. So there is a working mechanism which helps. If it is a 100% satisfactory arrangement, no. But is it something that we can work with and continuously push the envelope and get our way? Yes, and that's what we are doing. I think it's wrong to feel that we cannot move where we want, but it is also wrong to feel that we are moving everywhere we want without any hindrance. But in this gray zone, we are able to do our mandate-related movement, in my view, satisfactorily. Barring a few cases where we have taken it up with the UN headquarters, with the government, with everybody, and then got an understanding with the host government. So this is a daily battle. Different areas become denied, different timings become denied. So it's something that we work with continuously without, it's a tightrope walk, without altering the relationship with the host government, but at the same time doing what we have to do for the mandate. So I'll leave the questions addressed to the Nepalese general to him. I think that's about all was asked about South Sudan and particularly referring to me. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Please,
Can
General
I
Kai.
just add a little? It's the situation is totally recognizable, but in other missions also we've seen a lot of times that the curfew is interpreted like a curfew for the military or the mission in general, also for the military and UNPOL, which is not a curfew of the government. The curfew is for civilians. And we met that in several missions. And when we were talking about, well, is this a self-inflicted curfew or no, it's a governmental curfew. No, that is not a good understanding of this curfew issue, which actually means that military and police are not going out after 8 or whatever the curfew time is, which is wrong, because especially after curfew, you need to be out there, you need to be patrolling. So it's in several missions an issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you very much. I just want to add on, apprise you about the first-hand information which we got it from the mission areas. Like with regard to the freedom movement, there are actually provision of sharing of information, SOI, that is from the central level. But at the same time, when you go to the local levels, again, you have to get a clearance from the local level, sharing of information kind of provision. So there is somehow some kind of restriction is always there. That's why I mentioned it that the all concerned stakeholders should be, requesting host government and all concerned, to address this issue. With regarding the protection of civilian, I believe it is not only the military's responsibility. or single entity's responsibility to deal with this situation. At times, it is military's role is to create a conducive environment also. Like for example, in case of IDP camps and POC camp. So at times it is only responsibility can be to create a conducive environment for the other protection environment. About the conducting various operations, yes, our troops have conducted not only the robust posturing, but they have conducted operation against the armed groups, and few of our brave souls have already sacrificed their life in certain mission. So finally, what I would like to say is, like, it is not possible to protect everywhere at all times, but the only thing I think the population they want is that UN is doing their utmost for whatever the constraints or limitation they have with them. So they want UN to be seen, at least doing something at the utmost. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Josh.
Two quick points on the freedom of movement. Access restrictions and flight restrictions are SOFA violations, and the missions in Mali and CAR also reported a lot. MINUSMA before it was terminated, and MINUSCA for a time. I'm not sure the current status, but they represent the withdrawal of host state consent to the mission to be able to implement its mandate, which is a violation not only of the SOFA but of the resolution that the Security Council passes every year to mandate the mission. So it's an operational issue with a political solution. It's the primacy of politics always comes in, and it's really important for member states, especially the Security Council, to recognize that this represents a withdrawal of host state consent, and to support the missions in that regard. I think I'll leave it there. Yeah.
Thank you, Josh. That's more or less what I would have said in response to that question, so thank you for taking care of that. I think we've come to the end of this panel. I've slightly exceeded our allocated time. Our MC is probably already hovering somewhere. I wanted to just thank our panelists very much for their contributions. I'm also happy to say that one of the great added values of these meetings in our experience, and we designed them that way together with the co-hosts, of course, is, as one of the opening speakers said, to showcase who is actually contributing the bulk of our troops and police in the missions. And it's wonderful that we've had 3 of the 4 top South Asian contributors prominently represented this morning and this afternoon in the 2 sessions. And of course, we're being hosted by the largest African troop contributor. So just want to pay tribute again to the personnel serving from all of those countries in our missions, and the leadership that's coming from those countries as well in some of our most difficult missions. With that, I hand it back over to the MC.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, this marks the end of today's sessions. We'll return to our respective residences and then converge again at 1900 hours for dinner. Tomorrow we will start at 0900 hours for the first session, and this will be the final day of the conference. So we have 2 sessions. One on strategic communication, misinformation, disinformation, and hate speech from 9 to 10:30. Then we'll have another one, the 4th session, on the interplay between protection of civilians and strategic communications from 10:45 to 12:15. We will then have a closing ceremony before breaking off for lunch. I thank you very much for your rapt attention and for your participation in today's sessions. Have a good evening, and let's meet at 7 for dinner. Thank you.